Now, what if you already have a code locally? Let's say you created some boilerplate code and you want to check it to Git repository instead of cloning an existing one. In that case, you can create a local repository in your code and then push that local repository to the remote. And this can be a pretty legitimate use case, especially when you start working on a code, you develop stuff on your machine, especially if it's a private project, and at some point you decide to host it on GitLab or GitHub or some other Git repository. So now you need to move your existing code from your local machine to GitLab, for example. So let's actually see how that use case works. So I have a project locally that is not a Git repository, right? I have some files there, I have the application code and so on. And if I do git status here you see not a Git repository or any of the parent directories. So this basically means there is no .git folder in this project, something that we have in here, that contains the information about the remote Git repository, about my Git user and email and so on. So we have to transform that project, this Node.js app project, to local Git repository. And we do that using git init. And here you see initialize empty Git repository. And if I do I see .git was created. So now if I do git status, here I have a bunch of files that I can now commit and then push to a remote repository. So I can do git add dot. This will add all the files that were marked red. Here's the whole list. And let's commit and say this is initial code, right? Let's clear that again. And git status will show us that there is nothing to commit. We have no changes. However, we have local commit for the initial code. And another change you probably also notice is that the moment that we transformed it into a Git repository, a default branch name, the master branch name, got created and added here. And we see that in the command line as well. Now we have a local Git repository, but it doesn't know anything about a remote repository. So if I do git push here, basically it says no configuration for push destination. So it doesn't know where to push this code to. It isn't connected to any remote repository. So what we can do in this case is go back to our GitLab and create a new empty project. And let's call it some test node app, keep it private. So now my local Git repository and this remote repository do not know anything about each other. So we have to connect them. And the way to do that is actually also described here with this command. So git remote, we already did the git init, and git remote add origin, the address of the repository. And if I go back here, basically I have the same suggestion written here. So it's very descriptive and they give very good instructions of how to do stuff. So I'm just going to copy this command because it already has the name of our remote repository, the endpoint of the remote repository in the command. And I'm going to copy it here. So what this does is basically tells my local Git repository where to push the changes to. So it tells what the remote repository for this local repository should be. And origin is the name of the destination, and this is the URL of the destination. And now, if we do push, we see another error. And this one says, now it knows where the remote repository is and how to connect to it. However, now it cannot connect the branch, right? It says the current branch master has no upstream branch. So what this means is that now the repositories are connected. A remote repository is connected to the remote. Now we have to connect the branches. Now we have to say master branch locally has to connect to the master branch on the remote repository. So we have to push the branch as well. So if I do git push set upstream origin master, here we see branch master set up to track remote branch master from origin. So now they're connected, and if I refresh this here, I see my whole code in the remote repository. And note that these changes that I just made here, git remote add origin and setting this upstream of my master branch, this information actually got added to this .git folder. So this is where all of this gets configured. And it stores the information about how to connect to the remote, where's the remote, which endpoint, and how the branches actually connect to each other. If I deleted that .git folder, then my project will not be a Git repository anymore, and I would have to connect or reconnect my local repository to the remote again. So this has basically everything I need for that connection between the remote and local repositories. So if I decide that I don't want to host this project anymore, I want to delete that from here, but I also want to delete any Git configuration, then I can basically just remove this folder and that will be it. So if I remove that, see, I don't have the branch name displayed here anymore. If I do git status, not a Git repository. So the connection is lost with the remote repository.